I'm going to show you how to make a basic cupcake recipe. Lots of people have been requesting it. So here I've got 4 ounces of softened butter, and to that I'm going to add 4 ounces of sugar. And now in my pantry I didn't have caster sugar, I just had granulated sugar. That's completely fine. All sugar melts, so you can use granulated instead of caster, and it's the one that most of us tend to have in the house anyway, so it saves you having to go and make a journey to the shop. So I'm using a wooden spoon to do this, firstly because it's nice and quiet so you can hear what I'm saying, but also as long as your butter is softened it's really quite effortless. Now if you're not organised enough to leave the butter out of the fridge, you can just pop it in the microwave. I use a glass bowl and put it in for sort of 10-second bursts. This took 20 seconds. You don't want it melted, but you want it just soft so that when you touch it, it feels really like it's ready to go. You don't need to really mix it for that long. It's not going to go as light and fluffy as it's going to look if you are using caster sugar. So that's what it looks like now. It's all the butter and sugar is incorporated together, and to that I'm going to add eggs. So I always use free-range eggs. Now again, in the kitchen I didn't have large eggs, I only had medium eggs, and normally I would use large eggs for this recipe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2.5 medium eggs. So I'm going to crack them into the bowl just to check that they are good eggs. If any shell goes in there, it's easier to get it out of there than it is out of the mixture. So putting 1 egg in, and you don't very often come across rotten eggs nowadays, but when I was a kid and I grew up in the middle of the countryside and we had chickens, you did used to be a little bit careful in case an egg had not been found for a few weeks, and you know you wouldn't want to ruin your mixture. Now you can see here the mixture's looking a little bit sort of curdled, so it doesn't matter, that's all going to come together, and even if it looks curdled when you've finished adding all the eggs, which often it gets worse the more eggs you add, once you add the flour to it, it will bring the mixture back together. So that's 1 egg, 2 eggs, and then I've got half an egg here. This is the white from an egg, but you could just as easily use the yolk. Depends if you want to have the yolk left for mayonnaise or the white left for meringue. Okay, so I'm just going to mix that all in together now. Just make sure that any mixture that's on the wooden spoon gets brought into the rest of the mixture, otherwise you quite often find that you've just got sort of the butter and sugar on the back of the wooden spoon, and we want it all mixed in together. And now I'm going to add the self-raising flour. Now I sometimes add a teaspoon of baking powder to the self-raising flour, but as this is a very quick, simple recipe, and I know that it's self-raising flour that does have a good amount of raising agent in, I'm not going to worry today. I also haven't sieved the flour. I don't feel that very often you need to sieve flour. I've tried it with sieved flour and without, and I cannot see any discernible difference. There are recipes where it does require sieving. If your baking powder or bicarbonate of soda is separate, then you want to sieve it so that it all gets mixed together. And also if you're using cocoa powder, big lumps of it are really horrible and bitter, so you do need to make sure you sieve the cocoa powder in when you're making a chocolate cake, for example. So there we have it. So the cake mixture is a nice kind of quite moussey sort of texture. The other great thing about using a wooden spoon is it gets you really connected with the mixture, and you can kind of see what it's meant to look like, whereas if you use an electric whisk you're a bit more removed from it, and it's quite good just to sort of know what it should be doing at what stage. Okay, so I'm just going to add the flavouring, and with a basic cupcake recipe I will normally use vanilla. So this is a teaspoon of vanilla, and this is really good quality vanilla extract rather than essence, and it may seem a bit more expensive when you buy it, but generally you're buying it in bigger bottles, and you'll find actually that milliliter for milliliter there's not an awful lot of difference in the price, and the little bit extra expense is worth paying because it smells amazing. I can really smell that vanilla scent coming up from the mixture. Okay, so now the mixture's ready to go in the cake cases. So let's clear the decks. And I've got a muffin tin here. You need a muffin tin rather than the old-fashioned fairy cake tin because they're too shallow, and you need this size muffin case as well, nice and deep. Otherwise, when you come to ice your swirls and, you know, lovely icing effects, they'll be too top heavy if you use the old-fashioned fairy cakes. So now, as you can see with these, I'm slipping them off from underneath rather than from the top. If you try and take them from the top, you'll often find you're kind of tugging at them, and you'll end up with a really odd shaped one, which when it goes in the tin is going to give you a pretty ugly shaped cupcake. So if you take them from the bottom, you'll just find they slide off quite easily. This mixture makes exactly 12, and there's a few different ways that you can portion the mixture up. You can use an ice cream scoop, you can use a tablespoon, or you can also use a disposable piping bag and just snip the end off and sort of pipe the mixture in. But I'm going to do it the way that I've always done it since I was 4 years old and had first started baking. Okay, so I'm using a loaded dessert spoon. For me, that's just the easiest way to do it, and I'm just going to knock the mixture in with my little finger, or you can use a teaspoon if you prefer. Try, and when you're getting the mixture in, try not to touch the sides. When you're first starting, it's easier said than done, but you will find that if you get the mixture on the sides, it will burn a little bit and it just won't look anywhere near as nice. Now, the great thing about this recipe is if you work in ounces, even though it seems a bit old-fashioned, then you can really easily remember this recipe because it's 4 ounces of butter, 4 ounces of sugar, 4 ounces of self-raising flour, and half as many eggs, so 2 large eggs. The really great thing with that is you don't have to have a recipe. It's a really easy one to just keep in your head. And if you wanted to make a larger quantity, if you wanted to make like a sort of 8-inch Victoria sponge sandwich, you could use exactly the same recipe, but you'd use 6 ounces of all the ingredients. And if you wanted to make double the quantity of cupcakes, you'd make 8 ounces. You can make 60 ounces or a pound of each ingredient, and then it would be 8 large eggs. But this is a really lovely, simple one to play around with. As you can see, I have pretty much cleaned the bowl out. So these are now going to go in the oven. They're going to go on at 170 degrees, and I've got a fan-assisted oven, so they're probably going to do in 14 to 16 minutes. So we'll put them in the oven and then we'll come back and see how they look then. Okay, so now for the second part of our recipe. Here are the cakes that have been cooled, and they've come out just right, just almost to the top of the cases, so that's just perfect for icing. And now we're going to make the icing.